The rain came down hard over Ekin Aye that night, hammering on tin roofs like 1,000 angry fists. Inside a small room lit by a single dying kerosene lamp, Nabinta lay curled on the floor, clutching her stomach, sweat mixing with rainwater leaking through a cracked window. She tried to call out. Her voice broke into a whisper. Somebody! Please! Anybody! No one came. Not because the town was empty, not because no one heard her, but because, for the first time in her life, nobody wanted to be the one who came. 3 years earlier, that same woman had been the loudest, brightest sound in the whole market. Nabinta! Nabinta, wait for me! A trader shouted across the row of stalls, laughing before she'd even reached her. That was how it always was. People ran toward her, never away. Her laughter carried over the bargaining voices and the clucking of hens. Women set down their baskets just to hear her talk. Children tugged at their mothers' wrappers, begging to slow down near her stall. If Nabinta ever kept quiet for one whole day, old Baba Tunde used to joke, wiping his brow under the market shed, the whole town would think she was sick. Everyone laughed. Nobody imagined how true that joke would one day become, or how far from funny it would eventually feel. But behind the laughter, in the quiet of her own home, Nabinta wore a different face. That night, after the market closed, she sat by the window as her husband Jelani hammered nails into a chair in his workshop outside. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of hoping. Still, no child. She heard drums in the distance, another naming ceremony, another family celebrating a birth that wasn't hers. She pressed her palm against her chest and let the tears fall in silence, wiping them quickly the moment Jelani's footsteps approached. "You're still awake?" he asked gently, setting down his tools. "Just thinking," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jelani studied her face the way a carpenter studies wood grain, carefully, patiently, looking for the crack before it splits. He didn't push. He rarely did. Instead, he sat beside her and took her hand in his. "Tomorrow," he said, "I have a surprise for you." She turned to him, eyes still wet. "What kind of surprise, Jelani?" He only smiled. "You'll see." The next morning, he walked her 3 streets down to a small building with fresh blue paint and a hand-painted sign that read, Nabinta's Store. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Jelani, what is this?" "Your shop," he said, watching her face light up. "I used everything I saved, rice, beans, sugar, soap, drinks, all of it, inside. I want you to have something that's yours, something to fill your days with joy instead of silence and waiting." She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at once. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he said simply, "because I love you. And I hate watching you carry sadness alone." The whole town came for the opening. Music played. Children ran between the shelves, sneaking sweets when no one was looking. Mama Kemi, her closest neighbor, hugged her tightly, nearly lifting her off her feet. "This place will be full every single day," Mama Kemi said. "People don't just come to your stall for goods, my dear. They come for you, for your voice, your warmth." She wasn't wrong. Within days, the shop wasn't just a shop. It became a meeting place, a confession room, a small corner of the world where people came to be heard. "Can I tell you something?" A young woman whispered one afternoon, glancing over her shoulder as though the walls themselves might be listening. "But promise me you won't repeat it, not to anyone." "Of course," Nabinta said, leaning across the counter. "Your secret is safe with me. I swear it." And she believed it. Every single time she said it. She never set out to betray anyone. She simply loved to talk, loved the warmth of being trusted, loved the way people's eyes lit up when she leaned in close. And somehow, without meaning to, every secret she was given eventually found its way out of her mouth and into someone else's ear. It started small. A rumor about a neighbor's unpaid debt. A joke about who liked who. Harmless, she told herself. Everyone talks. It's just talk. Then Kojo walked in one evening, his voice low, his eyes tired and heavy with worry. "Nabinta, I need to tell someone before it eats me alive," he said, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles paled. "Before I met Essie, I had a son with another woman. Nobody knows this. Not my family, not hers. If this gets out before the wedding, it will destroy everything I've built." "Kojo," she said, placing a hand over his, "I swear on my own life, No one will hear this from me. Not one word. He exhaled, relief washing over his face like a man setting down a heavy load. Thank you. I trust you, Nabinta. 3 days later, while chatting with 2 women stacking tomatoes near her stall, the story slipped out of her mouth like water from a cracked pot. You know, she said, lowering her voice for effect, leaning in the way she always did. I heard Kojo has a son somewhere from before Essie. Can you imagine? The women's eyes widened. No, Kojo. Quiet, serious Kojo. That's what I heard, Nabinta said, already moving on to the price of tomatoes. By evening, half the market knew. By the next morning, Essie's family knew. By the following week, the wedding nearly collapsed entirely. Essie wept in her mother's arms, her whole body shaking. How could he hide a whole child from me? A whole human being. And I was going to marry him, not knowing. It's not what you think. Kojo tried to explain, but the damage had already spread like fire through dry grass, and no explanation could catch up to the flames. Elders were called. Apologies were forced through gritted teeth. The wedding survived, barely, held together by threads, but something in Essie's trust for Kojo, and for the whole town, was never quite whole again. Kojo found Nabinta days later outside her shop, his voice trembling with restrained anger he could barely hold in. I begged you, he said. I looked into your eyes, and I begged you, Nabinta. Kojo, I didn't mean to. It just came out. You never mean it, he said, cutting her off. That's exactly what frightens me. You never mean it, and yet it always comes out. He walked away and never fully spoke to her the same way again. She told herself it was one mistake, one slip. It wouldn't happen again. She promised herself that the way people promise themselves things they don't yet know how to keep. Then Amina came. Amina, the young seamstress preparing for her wedding, sat across from Nabinta one quiet afternoon, twisting her fingers nervously in her lap, her eyes darting toward the door. I tested positive, Amina whispered, her voice barely audible, for HIV. I haven't told my fiancé. I haven't told my family. I haven't told anyone except you. I just need someone to pray with me. Please, Nabinta, promise me you'll carry this to your grave. Nabinta held both her hands tightly, feeling them tremble. I promise you, not a soul will hear this from me. Not one soul. She meant it. She truly, desperately meant it. But days later, worried and unsure how to help, feeling the weight of the secret pressing against her chest, she found herself sitting with Amina's aunt over tea. I'm scared for Amina, Nabinta said, lowering her voice, leaning in the way she always leaned in. You should talk to her about her health, about what she told me. The aunt's face went pale instantly. What did she tell you? Tell me now, Nabinta. And just like that, without thinking, without meaning any harm at all, the words tumbled out of her. Within a week, the whole town knew. Amina's fiancé packed his belongings in silence and left without a single word of goodbye. Customers who once brought fabric to her sewing table stopped coming entirely. Children whispered and pointed when she passed on the road. Within a month, Amina's family loaded a truck with everything they owned while neighbors watched from behind half-closed curtains, pretending not to see. Before she left, Amina came to find Nabinta one last time. Her eyes were hollow, her voice flat and cold in a way Nabinta had never heard from her before. I trusted you with the one thing I was most afraid of in this world, Amina said, and you handed it to the whole town like it was nothing, like it was gossip about tomato prices. Amina, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to... It doesn't matter what you meant, Amina said quietly, each word landing like a stone. It only matters what you did. You destroyed my future in one afternoon of small talk. She turned and walked to the truck without looking back. Nabinta never saw her again. After that, something in the town shifted. Slowly, quietly, without announcement, people began to pull away. Customers who once lingered for an hour now grabbed their items and left within minutes, avoiding her eyes. Conversations grew short and guarded. Smiles grew thinner, more forced. Old Musa, who ran the other grocery shop across town, said little and repeated nothing. and business that once overflowed into Nabinta's shop began flowing steadily toward his instead. Day by day, week by week, she noticed the empty shelves before she understood why they were empty. Rice sacks that used to be restocked weekly now sat untouched for a month. The refrigerator that once buzzed with cold drinks sat unplugged to save money she no longer had. Suppliers who once extended credit without a second thought began demanding payment up front, their voices suddenly formal and distant. "I can't keep giving you goods on credit when your shop isn't moving anything," one supplier told her flatly, already loading his truck to leave. "It will pick up again," she insisted, chasing him toward the gate. "Just give me one more week, please." He shook his head and drove off with his truck still half full. At home, Jelani grew quieter with each passing month. He no longer told her about his work, no longer laughed at her jokes the way he used to. One evening, she watched him gather important documents from the drawer in their bedroom and carry them out to lock inside his workshop instead. "Why are you moving those?" she asked, standing in the doorway. "No reason," he said, not meeting her eyes, his voice flat. But there was a reason, and they both knew it, even if neither of them said it aloud. Then came the day everything truly broke apart. Years before Nabinta had even married into the family, Mama Sade, Jelani's widowed mother, had quietly sold a piece of inherited farmland. She had used the money to pay for Jelani's education after his father's sudden death. Only 4 people in the entire world knew this. It was a secret carried in silence for over a decade, guarded fiercely out of respect for family honor and Mama Sade's dignity. One ordinary afternoon, while chatting with a group of women near the well, Nabinta, without any memory of who had even told her, without any understanding of the weight it carried, let it slip, casually, the way she let everything slip. "You know," she said absent-mindedly, fanning herself in the heat. "Mama Sade sold the family land years ago, secretly. That's how Jelani finished his studies after his father passed." A woman nearby, whose husband had long resented not inheriting a share of that same land, went very still. By nightfall, the story had twisted and grown into something monstrous. Mama Sade had stolen family land and hidden the money for herself alone. The next day, Chief Ballerant summoned the entire family under the old mango tree. Voices rose in the afternoon heat. Old wounds tore open one after another. Cousins who hadn't argued in 20 years shouted across the gathering, pointing fingers, dredging up grievances from decades past. "She sold what belonged to all of us!" one relative bellowed, slamming his fist against his palm. "She used it to raise her son while the rest of us suffered and struggled," another cried out. Jelani stood in the middle of it all, humiliated before the elders, forced to defend a mother who had sacrificed everything she had for him. To restore peace, to silence the accusations, he agreed to repay money he did not have. His savings, painstakingly built over years of hard carpentry work, vanished in a single afternoon. That night, the house was silent in a way it had never been before. Jelani sat across from Nabinta at the table, his plate untouched, steam rising and fading from the food between them. "Jelani, please, say something," she begged, her voice cracking. He looked up slowly, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice quiet, quieter than she had ever heard it, quieter than anger, quieter than shouting. "A house can survive poverty," he said. "It can survive hunger. It can survive hard years and empty pockets, but it cannot survive a mouth that never closes." He stood, gathered a sleeping mat, and walked out into the night to sleep in his workshop. Nabinta sat alone at the table long after the lamp burned low, and for the first time in her life, she understood, truly understood, that silence could wound deeper than any shout ever could. If this story is gripping you the way it gripped an entire town, take a second right now to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. There's so much more waiting for you, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in Nabinta's story. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Nabinta's life. Jelani remained in the workshop most nights, coming home only to eat in silence. Neighbors who once called her name across the street now lowered their eyes and walked past quickly. Children who used to run to her shop for sweets were pulled away by their mothers before they got too close. Her shop stood nearly empty. Dust gathered thick on shelves that once overflowed with goods. The little bell above the door rarely rang anymore, and when it did, it startled her. She had forgotten what customers sounded like, Why is everyone avoiding me? She asked Mama Kemi one afternoon, desperation cracking her voice. Mama Kemi hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Nabinta, people are afraid of what happens to their business once it leaves your shop. That's all I'll say. Then came the rainy night. Fever gripped her body suddenly and violently, twisting her stomach into knots. She called out, but her voice was swallowed whole by the storm outside. She crawled toward the door, her strength failing with every inch, and collapsed against the frame. "Somebody, please," she whispered into the darkness, rain soaking through the wood beneath her. Hours passed. No one came. It wasn't hatred that kept them away. It was distance, a distance she herself had built. Conversation by careless conversation, secret by leaked secret, until no one felt close enough anymore to notice she was suffering, let alone come running. Near dawn, a familiar knock finally broke through her fading consciousness. Mama Said, soaked from the rain, pushed the door open and found her crumpled on the floor, barely breathing. "Nabinta," she gasped, kneeling beside her, lifting her head gently. "Child, what happened to you? How long have you been lying here?" She nursed Nabinta through the fever that night, boiling herbs over a small fire, wiping her brow with a damp cloth, sitting beside her until the morning light crept weakly through the window. When Nabinta finally opened her eyes, weak but alive, she expected to see anger looking back at her. Instead, she found only tired, patient eyes. "Why?" Nabinta whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "Why are you helping me? After everything I did to you, after everything I took from you." Mama Said took her hand and held it firmly. "A tongue is like fire," she said softly. "Once it leaves the mouth, even the owner cannot chase the smoke back inside. I am not here to scold you, my daughter. I am here to show you the road back, if you are brave enough to walk it." "I don't know how," Nabinta said, tears sliding down her thin face. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. This is who I've always been." "Then learn," Mama Sadi said firmly. "Not with words. Words are cheap now, and you have spent yours carelessly for too long. Learn with your actions. Apologize, not just with your mouth, but by becoming a different woman entirely." The next morning, weak legs and all, Nabinta began the hardest work of her life. She walked first to Kojo's compound. He stood at the doorway, arms folded tightly across his chest, unwilling to invite her in. "I have no excuse," she said, her voice shaking with every word. "What I did to you and Essie was wrong, and it was cruel, even if I never meant it to be. I am not asking you to forget it. I'm only asking you to know that I am ashamed, truly ashamed of who I was." He said nothing for a long, heavy moment, studying her face. Then quietly, "I hear you. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a door left slightly open." She traveled to the next town to find Amina, her heart pounding the entire journey. When Amina opened the door and saw her standing there, her face hardened instantly like stone. "Why are you here?" Amina asked, her voice sharp. "To say I'm sorry," Nabinta said, meeting her eyes despite everything in her wanting to look away. "I know it changes nothing for you. I know I can't undo what happened, what I caused. I just needed you to hear it from me, face to face, not through someone else's mouth this time." Amina's eyes filled with tears, not of forgiveness, but of old pain resurfacing all at once, raw and unhealed. "Some wounds don't close just because someone finally says sorry," she said, and shut the door gently but firmly. Nabinta walked away in tears, but she did not run from the pain this time. She let it teach her, let it sink into her bones as a lesson she would carry forever. Back home, she stood before Chief Balaran and the gathered elders under the same mango tree, her head bowed low. "I ask forgiveness," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands, "not because my words deserve it, but because I intend to prove with time, with silence, with changed action, that I have truly changed." Some elders nodded slowly, considering her. Others turned away without a single word. She accepted both outcomes without argument. Every day after that, when gossip drifted past her shop counter, tempting and familiar, she caught herself before speaking and swallowed the words whole, feeling them burn like coals in her throat. It was, she said later, the hardest fight of her entire life. Harder than hunger, harder than loneliness, harder than watching her marriage nearly collapse into ash. Weeks passed this way, one careful, silent day after another. Then, one afternoon, a respected woman from the far end of town sat across from her, eyes lowered, voice trembling with fear. "My husband has taken another wife," the woman confessed quietly. "I haven't told anyone. I don't even know why I'm telling you of all people." The old Nabinta would have repeated this story before sunset fell, without even realizing she was doing it. The new Nabinta simply reached across the counter and held the woman's hand firmly. "It stays here," she said. "With me. Only with me. I promise you that." And it did. Days passed. Weeks passed. The secret never surfaced. Not once. No whispers near the well. No twisted retellings in the market. Just silence. The kind of silence that, for the very first time in her life, protected someone instead of destroying them. Slowly, cautiously, people began to notice. "She hasn't repeated anything in months," Mama Kemi murmured to another woman near the well, watching Nabinta sweep her shop steps. "Maybe she really has changed," the woman replied, though doubt still lingered heavy in her voice. "Only time will tell," Mama Kemi said. "But I'll admit, it's the longest silence I've ever known from her." Trust does not return in a single day. It returns the way rain slowly fills a dry well, drop by drop, season by season, patience by patience. Little by little, customers began sitting a while longer at her counter again, testing the waters. Jelani began cautiously, sharing small pieces of his day with her once more over dinner. It wasn't the marriage they once had, full and easy. It was something quieter, more careful, more deliberately rebuilt. But it was real, and it was healing. Brick by careful brick. 2 years passed. Her shop never returned to the roaring business it once was, but it stood steady, modest, and full of a different kind of life. In the afternoons, children now gathered around her, not for sweets, but because she had become someone who listened without judgment and never ever repeated what she heard. Auntie Nabinta, a young girl, said one evening, tugging at her sleeve, "Can I tell you something? But you won't tell anyone." Nabinta knelt down to meet her eyes at her level. "It stays with me," she said gently. "I promise you that, with everything I am." And for the first time in her life, that promise meant everything it was supposed to mean. She never had children of her own, but in time she became something the whole town had never expected. A trusted keeper of hearts, a quiet guardian of the young and the wounded, a woman whose silence had finally become far more powerful than her voice ever was. As the sun set gold over Ikan one evening, Nabinta closed the door of her shop, looked out over the town that had once cast her aside completely, and smiled, not because life had become perfect, but because she had earned back something no amount of money could ever buy: the trust of her people. A wound made by a knife may heal with time, but a wound made by careless words often lingers in the hearts of those who carry it long after the words themselves are forgotten. Speak with wisdom, because every word you release has a destination you may never see, and you may not always be there when it arrives. If this story moved you the way it moved me while telling it, don't scroll away just yet. Drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. There are many more waiting for you, and the next one might just hit even harder.